Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to remind you, we are now, many of the interviews that we're doing on the show, we now broadcast it live via YouTube Live. So definitely, you should try to join us on my YouTube channel and follow me on Twitter, because that's where we basically announce which of these interviews you can watch whenever you have time. And boy, there's been some really interesting interviews recently regarding not only what's going to happen in the United States as Donald Trump returns to the White House, but also the impact this will have on Mexico, in addition to everything else that's going on in Mexico, which includes, all these constitutional reforms and violence in different parts of the country. So thank you so much for joining us, and definitely join me on at AM Salazar, which is my ex account, at AM Salazar, and at Mexico Daily. This week, President Claudia Sheinbaum announced something that she called Plan Mexico, Plan Mexico, Plan Mexico. And it was, I would say it was an extraordinary event, considering what had been happening regarding Mexico's economic and commercial and financial strategies during the prior administration. Joining us to explain what is Plan Mexico is, you know him well, Dr. Juan Carlos Baker. He is the former Vice Minister for International Trade. He is also a consultant. He advises companies who are interested in investing in Mexico. Juan Carlos, welcome to the show. Let's just jump right into it. What is Plan Mexico?
Ana Maria, thank you for having me again. I think it's the first time that we speak, at least live in this for your program in the year. So, well, Happy New Year.
Thank you.
May everything that's good come to you and your family.
Thank you.
Um, what's Plan Mexico? There are a few ways to answer that. I think that we can just obviously look at the objectives and see that according to what Claudia Sheinbaum said when she announced this plan last week, Plan Mexico is the attempt that her government is launching in order to promote certain objectives in areas regarding economic investment, job creation, education, and others. We can also say that Plan Mexico, it's a way of perhaps docking, in somehow the future trading relationship that Mexico will have with a few countries, naturally the US and Canada, our USMCA partners. But also, we could argue that Plan Mexico sort of lines what are the parameters that certain countries can know in advance they will find if their companies wish to come and invest in Mexico. I would also say that the Plan Mexico is perhaps, and this is very refreshing, I have to say, Plan Mexico can also be seen as the first articulated attempt, at least for the past 6, 7 years, to develop and implement an industrial policy, Mexico's version of the industrial policy. And well, that is obviously for all of us, analysts, businessmen, communicators such as you, to discuss, debate, assess. But clearly, it is refreshing that we see that there are some objectives, that there are metrics that are established to be followed, and to obviously judge the progress or lack of progress of the government of Mexico.
Well, let's just give me bullets of what they're trying to do with this plan. Some of the announcements seem very, very optimistic, very aggressive. I mean, the President Sheinbaum said she wanted Mexico to become the 10th economy in the world. So just lay out some of the
Sure.
objectives, the
Some of
metrics
the
of
uh,
this
that,
of
that,
this.
Certainly, one of the most important objectives probably is the one that you mentioned, that by the end of her administration, Claudia Sheinbaum is attempting to have Mexico moving from the 12th largest economy that we are right now into the top 10. That certainly is a very ambitious objective, because it implies average GDP growth that Mexico really hasn't had in a good number of years. So that would imply that the economy just jumped and started moving very aggressively. So that one is perhaps a bit too ambitious, but again, it is refreshing to see something that the ones that I find probably more appealing and at the same time more reachable, if you allow me, are those that imply increasing the participation of Mexican companies in supply chains. So, for example, one of the objectives is to increase by 15% the national content in the production, in the output of Mexico. And that one seems, more or less reasonable. It seems that it's something that if we align certain incentives for SMEs, if we make easier to do business in Mexico, that objective of increasing by 15% the national content seems reasonable. There's also another objective that says, for example, that the average length time for bringing investment into the country will be reduced from 2.5 years, 2.5 years, to only 1 year. So that is also reachable because at the end of the day, it's on the hands of the government to demand more or less red tape and requirements when processing those requests for investment. So again, there are 10, 12 objectives, if I remember by heart. Some of them certainly seem aggressive, but I believe that the ones that are more down to earth in terms of incorporating the Mexican companies into the supply chains to make requirements and red tape easier to process for companies coming into Mexico, that those are much more reasonable. And if I remember correctly by heart, about half of the objectives are on the latter basket of objectives that I mentioned to you.
So when you look at this plan, and clearly it's important in the way, especially the way you underline it. I mean, at least there is a plan, and it's not just some kind of president wakes up in the morning and kind of makes up some new project the way the former president did, which was just it was very confusing and clearly was not very efficient in terms of using Mexico's resources or the government resources. I mean, what resources must the government inject into this plan? And I ask you this because, as you know very well, Mexico doesn't have very much money. I mean, there is clearly budgetary constraints.
Absolutely. No, I think that you actually hit the bullseye on that one, Ana Maria, because some of these objectives, not only announcing them, but it's about deploying the necessary resources to get to those results that are currently being planned in front of us. So I think that clearly, if we are attempting to bring those investments or to promote that insertion of companies into the supply chains using subsidies or using other type of monetary policies, maybe then that's not going to happen because clearly the Mexican government has a very restricted space for moving in that regard. But I believe that the real differentiator that the Mexican government can do in order to better walk towards these objectives are in three areas. The first one, and this is something that the president has also emphasized a lot, is to reduce the red tape and the requirements for doing business, particularly by inserting or transforming some of those requirements into digital activities that you, me, or whoever is listening to your program can just log in on any computer and just avoid losing time and devoting resources for the operation of a business. So on that one, I believe that the Mexican government can do a lot of differentiation. And the president is also very fond of this type of particular activities because when she was the mayor of Mexico City, one of the points that she always got good marks and passed with flying colors was precisely the digitalization of the government. So I believe that's one area where she can make a difference. Second, and this sort of ties in with other topics that we discuss in your program, the relationship with the United States, bringing in more companies from countries with whom we have free trade agreements. That is also something that the government can do, provide that extra level of certainty in addition to the free trade agreements that the country enjoys if you come and you invest and you participate in these industries, well, good news. I already have another program that might be of your interest, and we are here to help. So there's a sort of connection towards other efforts being deployed overseas with the Plan Mexico in of in itself. And third and lastly, that I believe that the Mexican government can do to launch this program, given the lack of resources, and this actually should be pretty obvious right now. But well, considering where we're coming from in the last administration,
Right.
to instruct the government and mandate the cabinet to sit down with the business community, hear their concerns, and act on them. And I know that this sounds pretty obvious, but we in the past have also spoken on how during the AMLO administration, this communication and outreach with the private sector was not top of the agenda. Let's put it like that.
Well, they were antagonic. I mean, it was quite surprising in many ways how critical former President Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador was with the business community. But at the same time, when you look at the numbers, it seems that the business community did okay during his administration. And there was there was increased foreign investment, at least it appears in the numbers, which leads me to the following question, Juan Carlos. How much of Plan Mexico depends on foreign investment? Does this plan actually kind of, is it going to encourage more investment by North American partners? Is it promoting investment by countries, by companies from other countries? And I'm particularly thinking about China, which you know very well is a point of contention with incoming President Donald Trump, the amount of Chinese investment in the country. So could you just talk about Plan Mexico and the international investment component?
Of course. No, I think that the success of the program clearly implies or assumes that investment flows will continue to come into Mexico. As you mentioned, despite several situations that we had last year, the reality is that the numbers of FDI in Mexico, we don't have the numbers for the full 2024 year, but just what we already record between January and September 2024, Mexico already surpassed the amount of FDI that was received in 2023. So for all intent and purposes, I think we can say that 2024 for FDI in Mexico will be a record year. But again, things will happen. Trump will happen. The constitutional amendments in Mexico also took place in the latter part of the year. So we are still to see how all of those elements sort of distilled into the numbers of FDI. And that is perhaps probably why Plan Mexico correctly assumes that, in order for the country to continue attracting this investment, particular more focalized efforts need to be deployed. Now, how are companies going to react to the plan, and is this going to be sort of a catalyst for more investment? I think it will, because if the regulations, if the behavior of the government, as it is stated in the program, will facilitate or will emphasize local over foreign in particular areas. Some of the sectors that are singled out include textile, footwear, a couple of others. Well, for the companies that are participating in those sectors, the most logical action would be to come and invest in the country rather than start importing all of that. Now, is Chinese money or Korean money or Japanese money or American money be interested in the program? I believe they will. Obviously, it varies from country to country. Now, to your question as to whether this is going to bring more Chinese investment and hence, maybe inadvertently increase tensions with the U.S. given this Chinese presence, I think that is certainly a possibility. We cannot disregard it. But I believe that what really is important of this Plan Mexico in that sense is that it clearly outlines in which sectors objectives are being laid out. Textiles, footwear, as I mentioned. Well, maybe U.S. companies are not necessarily interested in those sectors. They are more interested in advanced manufacturing, artificial intelligence, critical minerals, what have you. So if Chinese money comes and starts making trousers and sneakers in Mexico, well, maybe that should not be too upsetting for the U.S., but we will see, certainly.
One last question, and I really appreciate you joining us. In terms of the constitutional reforms that are currently being implemented and that could have an impact on Mexico's trade agreements and possibly investments. I mean, does those reforms somehow affect this strategy? And I'm thinking about, of course, the judicial reform, where judges will now be elected. We're going to have elections in June, July. The fact that these independent or agencies that had the responsibility of checks and balances. I mean, of all the reforms that are currently being implemented, which are any of these reforms could potentially impact this plan?
Yes, I think that there are two in particular. There were several constitutional reforms passed last year. But there are two in particular that may probably have some influence on whether those objectives that we just spoke about are going to be achieved or not. The first one, and this is much more practical from the day-to-day operations. The first one is the energy reform. For many of these things to happen, you need to have an accessible, affordable, predictable supply of energy, right? Whether that is electricity, hydrocarbons, I mean, whatever, right? And the way that the energy reform was approved last year in Mexico, it is giving back to the state, to the government, a predominant role in the energy sector. And we already know that the government has not really invested in keeping up with the generation of electricity, just to name one example. So if all these activities outlined in Plan Mexico do not have the power to really get the factories going and create those jobs, then, well, certainly that is a reform that could jeopardize the objectives. And the other one is the judicial reform. Of course, you already mentioned that. Right. The fact that we are moving to this new system, I really won't add any adjectives on it. But the fact that we're moving into that clearly raises a couple of eyebrows here and there. You don't really know how that is going to play out once that the judges have been elected, and the first few decisions that they take when it comes down to business matters. Are they going to have the knowledge, the experience? Are they really going to just follow what their gut tells them? That is also going to be problematic. It could be problematic.
And of course, we have to follow very closely what happens in the United States and the Trump announcements in regards to future tariffs, not only for Mexico and Canada, but the rest of the world. Just to remind us, and I promise you, this is my last question. What are the sectors or the industries that could most benefit from Plan Mexico?
Well, the ones that Plan Mexico singles out are very traditional light manufacturing industries. They specifically talk about textiles, footwear, furniture, that type of interior design things, toys. They also speak, the program also speaks about manufacturing vaccines in Mexico. They also speak about but in general, those are the sectors that I remember by heart. Some sectors, traditional, so to speak. And I would argue that the industries related to those sectors can also be indirectly benefited by them. Logistics and transportation. If it's about vaccines, it requires certain management and certain conditions that not any logistics or transportation company can offer. So if there's an increase or if there's a benefit, to the vaccine industry, so to speak. Well, by extension, those services providers for them would also be benefited.
Do we have any sense when there could potentially we could start feeling the impact of the strategy?
Well, there's a calendar for the Plan Mexico to start unfolding all the actions that President Sheinbaum launched last week. The calendar is actually very aggressive in terms of setting particular dates and timelines for the publishing of certain decrees, the amendments of certain requirements. There's also the idea to provide financial tools on this. And everything that was launched or everything that was announced during the launching last week had timelines between late January and mid-April. So we're speaking about 3 months here, which again was also very refreshing in terms of seeing the urgency injected in this plan.
Juan Carlos Baker, former Vice Minister for International Trade, also currently a consultant, advises companies that are interested in investing in Mexico. Really, I really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
As always, my pleasure. And I know we will be speaking often throughout 2025.
I believe so. In fact, the next couple of weeks, once we have a better sense as to where Donald Trump's strategies in terms of tariffs and the future, of course, of the USMCA are clearly going to start, is going to be much more clear, I think, for all of us. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to go to commercial break, but please don't go away. You're listening and watching Living in Mexico. I'll be right back.